Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Peet van Biljon on the show today. Peet is the founder of BMNP Strategies LLC. He advises clients on innovation strategy, new product development, and R&D transformation. He serves clients in all sectors, but has particularly deep expertise in the high-tech electronics, software, and advanced manufacturing industries. Peet is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, where he teaches a graduate course on innovation and public policy. He was formerly a management consultant at McKinsey Company and managed McKinsey's global innovation practice. He has held executive positions in several companies internationally. Peet holds an engineering degree from Stellenbosch University and a master's degree in economics from the University of South Africa. Currently lives in McLean, Virginia. Peet, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Jared. Good to be with you.
Why don't we just jump right in? Tell me, what is innovation?
Okay, so my slightly longer academic definition of it is that innovation is a creative and analytically rigorous process for organizations to solve valuable problems for their customers and for themselves. Let me unpack that really quickly.
Sure.
So the end of this to solve valuable problems for their customers and for themselves referred to my belief that innovation is a means to an end, not an end in itself. We see so often, you can read annual reports, everybody loves saying innovation. You can read press releases, everybody loves saying something about innovation. I wish I could get a nickel anytime somebody uses the word innovation. I would share it with you. We would do very well.
Yes, we would.
So what I often end up asking clients when they say that they want to innovate more or they want to get stuff done or whatever, I said, well, what do you need innovation to do for you? So what kind of valuable problem do you want it to solve for you? Is it because you want more revenue? Is it you want more profit? Is it you have an efficiency problem? So it becomes very real very quickly if you say, why do you want to innovate?
Right.
So that's the second part of it. And the first part, it's a creative and analytically rigorous process. So that refers to the whole left and right brain idea. We cannot do innovation if we're just doing the creative stuff. We need to do the homework, we need to do the analysis. But if we just do the analysis and we just ask the what questions and the why questions, and we don't do the creative side, which is asking like the what if questions, how things could be different kind of questions, we're also not kind of completing the loop on innovation.
Right. That's so true. How do you help your students and clients think about connecting those things? Is it something that is, it has to be present in a single person? Is it something you balance at a team level, at an organizational level, the left and right brain piece?
That's a really good question. It's very much, innovation is very much a social enterprise. So you have to consider everything at the organizational level. One of the biggest problems I have with the Hollywood depictions of innovators is that it's like the crazy professor with wild hair or whatever. It's like a single person who managed to come up with all this stuff. This is not how innovation works. It is true that when you have a team innovating, you can have different roles on it. Some people can take care more of the of the blocking and tackling. Others can be working more on the insights or the creative part. So when you do innovations, you have like different roles, and some people are more comfortable with being in some modes than other, and there are ways to test for that when you have different team members. For example, I have one of the innovation diagnostics that I use can show you if you have people fulfilling these kind of roles. it's called like the 10 personas of innovation from Kelly from IDEO, which is a very good way of thinking about the personas of it. So that's the innovation process. But then in terms of how you manage it, that's really hard because especially in an existing business, you are asking managers at the highest level, and depending on how many levels down you're doing, you've structured it, you're asking them to do two jobs. You're asking them to kind of keep the trains running with the existing business, where everything is about efficiency and optimization and getting things done quickly and not wasting money, versus the innovation side of their activities, which is where you need to be willing to break things, have much more of an open mind, be willing to play around, experiment, basically pay money to learn lessons,
right?
And gain insights, whether it's about the technology or your customers. There's actually a term for that. It's called ambidextrous leadership. Again, this left-right thing. But it's tough for people to balance it. Just put yourself in a position of a CEO who has like a meeting about quarterly financials with her CFO at 2:00, and then at 3:00 talking about some out there kind of new technology that some team's working on, talking about what they're doing there. Right. It really requires a lot of gear shifts for the managers.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that kind of back-to-back sort of conversation. I can imagine, having a conversation with the CFO where you're discussing, millions of dollars in terms of being where you need to be from a P&L standpoint, and then having the next meeting where someone's literally asking you for millions of dollars to go learn and something that may be useful 5 years from now when you're trying to hit a quarterly P&L target in the previous meeting.
That's so very true, and that's the money side of thing. And then there's just the mindset thing, where with the finance, it's all tangible. If it's not in a spreadsheet, it doesn't exist, as a CFO once said to me. And then you look at the innovation side of things, and then you have to be able to handle the uncertainties and the ambiguities and so on a lot more. And there's actually been research that shows that one of the things that suppress creativity is uncertainty. Human beings don't like uncertainty. So if they connect uncertainty to creativity and by association to innovation, that's going to suppress innovation. So you have to kind of find the right techniques to get people a bit more comfortable with that side of it.
Interesting. Certainty to me sounds a bit like, and this is probably another dichotomy that you've seen and dealt with. It's not that innovation requires no boundaries, right? It almost sounds like when you talk about certainty being a catalyst for creativity, you need to give people the right boundaries to be innovative, versus here's a pile of money, go off to this other to this special location and come back and tell me what you got.
That's right. You have to harness creativity. You have to put boundaries on it. And it's interesting because there's Peter Drecker, a guy that the present generation of executives probably don't read as much as they should, but he's still considered, a great thought leader in management and as well as innovation. He gave us, some decades ago, this idea that innovation has to be systematic, that it's a purposeful and organized search for things that are changing. And then an analysis of what opportunities might come from those changes and how you could innovate based on those. So it's interesting how that definition kind of handles this dichotomy, because what he's saying is you've got to have, in terms of your certainty, you almost have to have a process that works for you as an organization.
Right.
And then inside this process, you can kind of deliberately look for things that are maybe uncertain, unexpected. As you said, you're looking for unexpected failures, right? And then you might realize that the glue doesn't work for this, but you can make post-it notes out of it, that kind of thing. You're looking for incongruities between things that your customers tell you and things that they really do, and maybe that tells you about the product. So he actually came up with a whole list of weird things or changes and so on to look for. But the idea that you have this robust process to handle all that is I think, the way to resolve the seeming contradiction. It's almost like having a fire that can safely burn, inside an enclosure.
Right.
Which and so you figure out a way how to handle that.
Right. That makes sense. So, with that sort of understanding of what innovation is, and that view of it, in your mind, what isn't innovation?
Well, very good question. And, at a very practical level, I've seen people claim things as innovation or not innovation, depending upon what's incentivized, right? So if there's budget for innovation, whatever you're working on is innovation.
Right, exactly.
If there's no budget for innovation, but budget for other things, then whatever you're working on is not innovation.
Right.
So that's one way of looking at one thing to watch out for is just the human nature and trying to adopt it. But I would say, if you go back to my definition, that to innovate is to have an analytically rigorous as well as a creative process for coming up with solutions to valuable problems. If you remove any of those elements, it's not innovation. If you're not working on solving a valuable problem, then you're kind of just entertaining yourself, and it's not innovation.
Right.
If you're neglecting the analytical part of it, you're not doing your homework, then that's not proper innovation. But if you just do the analytics and there's no creativity, no attempt to look at things in a new way, then that's not innovating at all. So that's kind of a response from what does it mean to innovate versus not to innovate.
Right.
And that's the verb. So if I go to the noun, I still always go back to the definition that we got from the mid-20th century Austrian economist who ended up at Harvard in his later years, who gave us three definitions of three things, of which innovation is only the second step. So he said, of innovation, his definition was: innovation is creative destruction where entrepreneurs combine existing elements in new ways. And so when you're talking about existing elements, you're thinking, well, what's come before? Right. And in Schumpeter's system, what comes before is invention. That's when you've come up with a new thing, like it's the laser or the transistor or whatever. So take the transistor, for instance. The transistor was developed at Bell Labs in the late 1940s. And the people who were involved in that, the physicists and so on, they got Nobel Prizes. But Bell Labs never commercialized the transistor. And the first really, what we would call today a killer app, the blockbuster application of the transistor, was when the founders of Sony Corporation, just after the Second World War, visited the US and looked around for what they could do to build a business with. And they saw the transistors. Raytheon were already making, some other US companies, I think Texas Instruments, there were a number of companies making transistors. And if it's not Raytheon, it's probably some others. But a number of transistors were around, and they picked the best, most robust ones that have already kind of proven themselves, because the initial ones, like any new technology, were not very reliable. Right. And they took the idea back, and they made these little pocket transistor radios that people of previous generations may remember. These tiny little pocket transistor radios that were a tremendous hit with the Japanese public, especially the younger people after, in the aftermath of the Second World War. They could listen to their music or whatever, they could carry it around with them. It was like before the Walkman, before the iPod, before the iPhone or the smartphone. That was like the original portable electronic consumer product that was a huge hit. Hundreds of millions of these things were made. Wow. So if you look at that story, the transistor was the invention. The innovation was realizing that you could put a few transistors. The initial radios didn't even have many. You could put a few transistors together to make a working transistor radio that was small, that could work with a 9-volt battery, which was also an innovation at the time,
right?
And that people could carry their music with them. So what's the third stage in this process, according to Schumpeter? It's what he called diffusion. We could call that table stakes, or everybody else has got it. This is when the technology is so ubiquitous that you can't really make much money out of it anymore because everybody's got it. Then you have to come up with the next innovation to make money. So it's kind of a useful way of thinking about it, because I think a lot of time people confuse some parts of research and development with innovation. If you map the parts of research and development that are really more about the invention to invention, then you can separate out the parts that are more about applying the technology, building blocks to a new product or other kind of offering.
Right. Interesting. That has so many different implications to it. Not only how big companies would think about innovation, looking across R&D, product supply chain, looking across marketing and all the different functional aspects of things, but also potentially for even solopreneurs or small businesses out there, how they can think about what's really required to be innovative and how to best apply their limited resources, time, effort to its best effect in terms of trying to create something of value that adds value for their customers. It's not necessarily needing to have create a molecule or a widget that no one else has. That's only one part of the process.
Indeed, and I'm glad you mentioned entrepreneurs or even solopreneurs, because that is also an essential element of Schumpeter's definition, because he saw the entrepreneur as being central to this process of creative destruction. Creative destruction means both creating and destroying, right? So the automobile destroyed the horse-drawn buggy, right? The streaming video is destroying DVDs and Blu-rays and things like that. Right. So the new thing is destroying the old. It's cannibalizing its market. So he says entrepreneurs do that by combining existing elements in a new way. You don't have to invent a new altogether new to world, new to universe kind of thing to be able to innovate. That's a very important thing to realize for people. You can take existing technology that's already been proven and put it together in a new way to serve the needs of a customer.
Yeah, so important, and something that I think is important to hear, from an expert like you, who is, who knows innovation at a level that most people don't. For you to be, espousing the theory and the fact that you don't have to invent to innovate, I think is something important for people to internalize.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, by the way, but I consider myself a mere student of innovation. I think it's one of these things that you never quite master.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that you'd see yourself that way, and that's part of what makes you great to talk to, Piet. I think the story from of this Harvard professor makes me want to go a bit deeper on just kind of the history of innovation and how maybe management thinking around innovation, how has that evolved and changed over the years?
It's interesting because today innovation sometimes it's just a mother of an apple pie thing. People like to say innovation is a good thing, but innovation throughout the ages, it was only basically around the time of the Enlightenment in Europe that innovation became to be seen as something first acceptable and then as something good.
And that wasn't very long ago. I mean,
no, it wasn't very long ago. So prior to that, the ancient Greeks didn't like the idea of innovation. The medieval order, in Europe, controlled by the church and so on, didn't like it because they associated it, and perhaps rightly, with challenges and disruptions to the status quo. And so it was only really later on that it became more of something more acceptable around the scientific era, the Industrial Revolution, and so on. But it's interesting. We still obviously live with the same resistance, right, to the change that's brought from innovation. So these concerns sometimes ring very true. There's this wonderful quote from Niccolo Machiavelli in the thin little book, The Prince. From Machiavelli, we obviously got the term Machiavellian, and but he was also a very astute observer of humanity and how organizations work. So he said, it's one of the first quotes on innovation, and this is early 16th century. Wow. He said, "There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. For the reformer," or you could read the innovator, "has enemies in all those who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit by the new order. And this lukewarmness arising partly from fear of their adversaries and partly from the incredulity of mankind, who do not truly believe in anything new until they've had actual experience of it."
Wow.
I show this quote when I talk about innovation in organizations and why there's often resistance. This is not new.
That's a 450-year-old quote, right? I mean,
that's right. And if you change the language to a sort of more modern style of English, people wouldn't even suspect that quote is that old.
Someone could have said that last week.
Yeah.
If they were that eloquent and thoughtful. But yeah, it's not out of place in the 21st century. That's amazing.
So as these things started to happen in the scientific revolution, people actually started making products and so on. I think entrepreneurs had the sense that if they did new things and people liked it, they could sell them. But economists really didn't have a theory for, a good theory for innovation. In fact, if you do an introductory course, even today on macroeconomics, well, they teach you a lot of like new classical macroeconomics. You have to go to the index to see where they mention innovation, and they won't mention it often. And typically it will be in the sense of, well, innovation helps you to differentiate your product from the product of the next guy, right? And that gives you the ability to have a pricing premium, because as Sam Palmisano, former CEO of IBM, said, if you don't innovate, you're in commodity hell, right? So you don't want to be in commodity hell. You don't want your product to be exactly the same as everybody else's product, because then the price is just going to be slashed down to commodity level pricing.
Right.
So that was kind of the only way that the classical economic framework could make room for the idea of innovation. And we had to wait for the aforementioned Joseph Schumpeter to come up with basically a whole theory in the mid 20th century of how innovation can play a role in the whole never at rest capitalist economy. Because it's funny, Schumpeter actually also studied the writings of Marx, and we associate Schumpeter, and he was very much a free market economist. But a lot of what where he started was with some of the insights, and they were good insights. It was just that these prescriptions, I'm talking about Marx, were so terrible, but the insights that they often had on how the economy kept changing and so on were actually interesting. So Schumpeter started on that, and that gave us these definitions that I mentioned that are quite useful to understand how innovation drives prosperity and so on. And then we have to go to Peter Drucker to see the idea that innovation, organizations that want to do innovation well have to do it in a systemic way. And I would say in the last 20 or 30 years, post-Drucker, what we've had is this whole addition in the late 90s, early 2000s, this whole concept of design thinking coming from Stanford, coming from companies like IDEO and so on. That it has to be about understanding the customer needs. Right. It's about experimenting and testing things out, and then all that got combined with the ideas around running leaner and the ideas around agile that started with the software movement, doing quick scrums, doing quick cycle developments. So that all got combined into the lean startup concept, which Eric Ries came out with about 10 years ago, which I think is kind of the latest thing. And the funny thing I always say about what Eric Ries did with the lean startup is he took existing elements and combined them in new ways. So he took agile, he took design thinking, he took Steve Blank's idea of customer development, which is a really powerful way of thinking that when there's great uncertainty, you have to kind of develop the customer at the same time as you develop the product. So he took all these things and combined them in a very nice way into his innovation called Lean Startup, and that's been very influential. Now, Lean Startup is one way of doing things when you are in a startup kind of environment. It's not suitable for everything, and you are in a startup environment where there's lots of uncertainty.
Right.
If there's certainty, you can kind of use the more linear kind of established ways of doing things, and you actually should. And the trick is to know the difference again. If you're a manager and you have to decide what process to use, but that's kind of where we are today. We've seen that the role that how innovation plays a role in moving the economy forward. We've seen that it's systematic. That if you want to keep growing as a company and keep being ahead of your competitors, you have to be very systematic about it and look. And this is the other thing we got from Drucker: look for those changes. Look for changes in markets. Look for changes in behavior or whatever of your customers. Right. Look for changes in technology. Those are triggers of innovation that I think wisely counsel us to look out for. And then the idea that the innovation process itself has to be very customer directed, and creativity and the different roles and so on. That's the design thinking, and then put it all together with the other strains of thought around lean efficiency and agile and doing things with the customer, and you basically arrive at where we are today, where this is all. So there's a lot of tools available in order to innovate today. I think it's almost like an embarrassment of riches for, I sense it for clients, because you could read a new article in Harvard Business Review every month or every second month that makes you think, oh, this is the thing.
This is the new link. Yeah.
Now I need to do this, or now I need to do that.
Right.
Or, and so the trick is in selecting the right tools out of the toolbox and kind of combining the right way for the particular endeavor that you got going.
Yeah, I think that's so true in terms of looking at your current situation and wanting to do more innovation, better innovation, faster innovation, and finding that next article or doing some Googling and finding a framework. It implies that the shortest path to more or faster or better is a new process. And I think that's where, the value of having someone like you as a consultant or advisor comes in, because people don't even realize the bias that they're bringing to reading an HBR article. The thought that an article can give you a new way of thinking or doing that will change your current state. But there's also the aspect of your company culture, the capability of your team, and the person that wrote that article has no perspective on that.
Yeah, exactly.
So that kind of leads me to there's two things I want to talk about before I let you go. One is the we talked a lot about the private sector and customer centric thinking around innovation, and I'd love for you to touch on the sort of flip side of that around public sector innovation, and then also I wanted to see if you have any general advice for innovators out there. So those are my last two questions.
So let me take the first one, and this is obviously a big topic, the
Yes,
differences between the public and the private sector.
That's right.
That it's kind of, so that I could just basically touch on, I would say innovation is just as important in the public sector, but it manifests itself differently sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
There are differences in between private and public sector in terms of the cycle time and the risk tolerances. Those are the main differences. Now, this doesn't mean to say that the public sector is more risk averse in absolute terms than the private sector. You need to almost double click on that. The public sector, in fact, they are willing to take on huge technological risks, very long-term risks that the public sector is not willing to take on. The fact that we are talking right now is made possible through the internet, which is, as many people will know, is a public sector basically invention.
Right.
The little cameras that are on your smartphone, the reason that you have small little cameras that work so well and can take nice pictures of selfies of you or whatever your friends is that NASA needed small miniature cameras to put on their satellites. And so that technology got developed that way. We all use GPS all the time, right, which is a perfect example of a public good which everybody can use, which has been. So a lot of these private sector innovations wouldn't have been possible if the public sector wasn't willing to take on those risks. The funny thing is the public sector seems to be more accepting of long-term technological risk in these kind of things, but less accepting of, but less concerned about commercial risk or market risk, because and sometimes so they may not always innovate most appropriately for their customer base, right? Because they don't lose money if the DMV experience isn't that friendly to you. Right? On the other hand, the private sector is very attuned to the commercial risk and where the customers would accept things. But often, and you even see this with the startups and the VCs, they don't like high levels of technical risk. They rather want something that's already proven technically. So you could almost say that they prefer the invention to be made and the innovation technically to be proven, and then they're willing to deal with whether there's going to be enough market acceptance to make it profitable enough. And even in established companies, that's typically the kind of discussions focus on more the market side of things than the making technology work side of things. Because in the private sector, technology that doesn't work is it can be a really quick killer of not just a project, but of your entire company. So there's that difference in how innovation's perceived, and in terms of the risk and so on. There's obviously difference in where the funds are coming from, and what the taxpayers have different expectations to private investors. The funding process is different. The public sector tends to have a very strict annual process, and you lose funds that you don't use in most cases, whereas the private sector, can basically structure it the way they want, right? And any time of the year, and they get to make their own funding cycles, and they can use money that they haven't used, you haven't consumed. So there's a lot of those differences, but there's also a lot of things that are similar, right? All the secrets to success that you have to know. And maybe this gets more to your second question in terms of what do you need to do to get better at it. You need to align with the strategy. So this goes back to my original thing about why do you want to innovate?
Exactly.
If you can answer that question, and if you can put it in quantitative terms, I want to innovate because I want to expand my market here or whatever, and I need another 5 million customers or whatever in this sector. That really gets your teeth into it.
Right.
And it also gets you the management support, because now you can show, whether it's public or private sector, now you can show how you are helping the organization achieve its purpose, its mission, and its goals at the highest possible level. The other big lesson is pick growth markets. You could be the best cell phone maker, like Nokia. If the market changes and the market wants smartphones with touch screens, you are going to lose out to an average maker of smartphones. So it's about being at the right place at the right time.
Right.
Is actually just as important in innovation as anything else. The most genius maker of horse carriages in 1920 would not have survived the automobile.
Right.
So people sometimes forget about that. You also have to find the right growth areas to innovate in, and then there's a lot of the how of innovation to get right. And again, long conversations, but about having the distinctive insights that allow you to come up with good innovation, putting in place a process that works for your organization in terms of how you want to experiment and test things and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 2 points, I think, are true not just for innovation, but for everything else. Execution's important. Innovation is complex, and it requires taking something from idea to scaling it up to launching it. So you got to sweat the details. You got to focus on how you're going to scale up things and how you're going to get the product or the service out the door. And there's no substitute for exercising and developing those execution muscles in the organization. And then, which is the last word that I'll mention, that's the organization. It requires the efforts of many people to get an innovation successfully launched, and it all starts with leadership. It requires a healthy organizational environment, so that people are willing to take a little bit of a risk, are willing to exchange information and knowledge and collaborate. And innovation doesn't work if the organization is dysfunctional. Innovation, I always like to say, is like the canary in the coal mine. You may find out that you're having problems with innovation, and then you may realize, well, these problems go way beyond just innovation. The organization itself is in need of attention.
Very interesting. Yeah, innovation stresses and puts strain on the core elements of what it means to be, a collaborative, communicative, effective organization. Innovation leans heavily on that, especially in large cross-functional companies. So I could see if you're having an issue in a specific area, innovation being the first place that shows the canary in the coal mine. I love that. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's wonderful. I took away, it's got to be connected to strategy. It has to be a relentless focus on execution, and it's got to be at the organizational level for innovation to work. It seems to be the kind of three elements of your advice there. Is that a fair takeaway?
It is fair. I mean, I would add the things that, have to do with the innovate part of innovate, right? The creative and the experimental part about how you get the insights from different sources, Indeed. From your customers, from technology, from what other organizations are doing with business models and so on, and the supportive culture. And again, comes back to the organization and the even with your experimentation, it's an execution exercise. You've got to have a process whereby you can run these experiments and prototype, test, and learn. So I would add those parts to it as well. But yeah, but as you say, it exercises kind of all the organizational muscles, mm-hmm. which is why it's so telling for any organization. And I almost like, it's not a triathlon, it's like a decathlon. It's because it has these different events in, because innovation requires you to be creative, then it requires you to experiment, then it requires you to execute, but it also requires you to have your strategy sorted out, and so on and so on, right? So innovation, and you ask, well, why does it check all these boxes? And you know why? Because innovation is about starting a new business every time. It's like reinventing, and so that's why, because it's an entrepreneurial activity. And it's almost like you're back to the garage and your two friends and the dog or whatever, right? That you're starting with the business with. So it will stress test, like all elements of management.
Well said. Peet, thank you so much. We've been talking with Peet van Biljon, founder of BMNP Strategies LLC. And thank you so much, Peet, for agreeing to join me. We've known each other for a while. I remember when we met while I was at McKinsey, I thought, wow, this guy really knows his stuff and is a fascinating person beyond innovation and on all sorts of other topics. So thank you for your continued friendship, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Well, thank you very much, and likewise, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.